Ryan, and thank you for inviting me here today. I'm happy to talk to you today about compliance. And I know what you're all thinking. This is a great chance to catch up on my email, right? No, that's not true. Actually, compliance has changed a lot in the last few years, and it's going to be going through a huge transformation in the next few years that you need to know about. This is news you can use. If you pay attention now, you can get some real benefit out of this, and if you don't pay attention, you're really going to regret it in a few years. So why? Why are we seeing these changes in compliance? Well, it comes back to something that Kay referenced, which is the lack of consumer trust in technology, and specifically in IoT and our connected systems. And that lack of trust is in many cases well-founded. Attacks against IoT systems have been continuously growing for more than a decade, and they continue to grow not only in number but in severity. And consumers recognize that. They see that in the news, they hear about it, and so they rank security as their number one attribute they're looking for when they purchase an IoT device. In fact, they say consistently that they are more likely, and in most cases, very much more likely to buy an IoT device if it has a security label. And it's not only consumers who are concerned, but also nations, because they recognize that IoT and connected systems are basically everywhere. They're in our critical infrastructure across all different sectors, communications, energy, everywhere. And attackers know this too. And so we've seen targeted attacks by nation states, by terrorists, by criminals, and of course hobbyists, against critical infrastructure use of connected systems or IoT-type technology. So we can roll the clock back 15 years to Stuxnet, the granddaddy of these attacks, where someone, maybe the Israelis, decided that it would be a good idea if the nuclear enrichment site in Iran at Natanz just didn't work quite right. And so they engineered a cyber attack to make that happen. Again, this technology was picked up by someone, maybe the Russians, to go after the Ukrainian power grid back in 2015. And in some ways, this was a proof of concept for the rest of us that what could be done against other nations as well. Then cyber criminals got in the act with the ransomware attacks on the Columbia pipeline, which resulted in gasoline shortages up and down the east coast of the US, you remember a few years ago, when they had to shut down that pipeline for a couple of weeks. And finally, we've seen it spreading across all critical infrastructure here in the US with the Volt Typhoon attacks. So what are governments doing in response? Well, they're doing what governments naturally do. They're passing laws, creating regulations, and in some countries, voluntary programs to manage the risk of IoT cybersecurity flaws. Singapore was pretty early in this. About 5 years ago, they came out with their cybersecurity labeling scheme. And that's a national label for consumer IoT security based on a standard, an early standard in this area called ETSI EN 303645. And in Singapore, it was originally voluntary, this labeling scheme, and then it became mandatory for routers at least, and now for more healthcare systems. The UK actually did the work that ETSI EN 303645 was based on as a voluntary program 7 years ago. And, well, nobody paid any attention. It's the way it is with voluntary programs. So they went back to the Parliament and they said, we need to have a law that makes this mandatory. Now there's a law, and it took effect last April, that if you want to sell an IoT system in the UK, you have to comply with at least 3 of the basic elements in that code of practice. And then the EU picked up on that. They said, great idea, we'll take those requirements, and we'll put them into our radio equipment directive, an already existing set of rules and regulations for radio equipment to be sold in the European Union. And so the radio equipment directive has now been altered with some added requirements out cybersecurity and privacy that will take effect August 1st of this year. If you want to sell anything that has a radio antenna in it in the EU, you will be required to comply with those requirements. And then the US, not to be outdone, we've created our own program, purely voluntary. We take the carrot approach, not the stick approach, at least for the time being. The US Cyber Trust Mark is a voluntary label based on our own standards, NIST IR 8425, and plan to be operational this fall. The EU, not to be outdone, has created Cyber Resilience Act, which takes their basic requirements from RED, ups them to the nth degree, and establishes them not only for radio equipment, but for any product that has a digital element. So it doesn't even have to be connected. Credit cards, smart cards, passports, and certainly any kind of connected device, including PKI, explicitly called out there as covered under CRA. So their requirements that are included in CRA will be in place in order to sell any product with a digital element, software or hardware, in the EU effective 11th of December 2027. So that probably got your attention. And as each of these progresses, they include additional requirements. They're constantly raising the bar, expanding the scope, as you can see, so that it's not just on an IoT device, but on many more systems. Another innovation in CRA was establishing 3 levels of risk, default level and 3 higher levels. Now, you might say, oh, I understand this, TLS, we've always had that, well, not always, but for 20 years, TLS or SSL, secure communications, we've got that under control. But that's just part of the problem. What's new here is requirements for product security. So not just securing our protocols, but securing the endpoints of the communication. And so the devices, whether it's your mobile phone or an app on the phone or a cloud or a gateway or an IoT device itself, all of these elements now have to have secure boot, secure storage, and yes, secure communications, secure software and firmware update, and secure by design. So they're getting into processes, the development process, and how we go about developing these products. We have to start with a risk analysis, and so on and so forth. And it includes supplier management. So you have to make sure that your suppliers are managing their own cybersecurity. It includes a requirement that you make software updates for security available for free throughout the defined lifetime of this product. And that has to be at least 5 years under CRA. So even if you built the product 10 years ago, if you're still selling it 4 years from now, you have a 5-year period at least where you have to continue to provide those security updates, not just for your product, but for software and hardware components in it. And of course, you have to supply an SBOM and hardware bill of materials for your product to your customers as well, so they can check up on you to make sure you're doing it right. This is my last slide. That was my cue to switch to the last slide. So you're probably worrying, oh no, now I have to worry about compliance with all of these different nations, and they all have different requirements, and I have to go through certifications over and over again. It sounds like a real headache. Potentially for you, it's a real powerful tool that you can use to raise this to the attention of management. But if you ignore it, it'll be a real headache. I just wanted to point out that there's at least one effort to create a global program incorporating all these requirements into one program, the Product Security Certification Program from the Connectivity Standards Alliance, with the idea that you certify once And then you can qualify in all of those different nations. So, thank you for having me here today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to your questions.